Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. 2:01. We're going to give it just 2 more minutes or so. Let people are still logging in. All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Sam Furio. I'm the outreach coordinator for the building decarbonization team at the Maryland Department of the Environment. Thank you for joining the second session of the Affordable Housing Provider Working Group. This afternoon, we'll be following up on topics discussed during session 1 and reviewing feedback submitted by attendees. Today, we are joined by Scott Falvey, Senior Energy Program Manager with the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, and Dr. Zach Brazola, Section Head of MDE's Building Decarbonization Team. Scott and Zach will be assisting during the Q&A portion of this session. This session will be recorded and uploaded to the BEPS YouTube playlist. There will be a portion for live Q&A at the end, but please bear with us as we go through our presentation first. If you have missed any of our previous informational sessions or require any of the materials distributed during each session, you can view previous recordings on this BEPS YouTube playlist. All materials are posted in the video's description on YouTube. And Michelle just dropped the link for the YouTube playlist in the chat. So go to the chat today for all the resources we'll be distributing. For this session, though, the chat has been disabled. In order to submit questions for the Q&A portion, you'll need to click on the Activities button, which is found in the bottom right corner of the screen. It shows a circle, triangle, square. The Q&A feature is accessible via this button. We will also be doing 2 polls at the beginning of this session. You can access the poll feature with this Activities button as well. Just remember, circle, triangle, square. That's where you need to go to participate today. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. Before diving in too deep, if you require an overview of BEPS, we would point you to previous webinars and technical documentation that is currently available for viewing on the department's BEPS website. You can access the website by scanning the QR code on the left side of the screen and or by searching Maryland BEPS in Google. We'll also drop the link in the chat for you all. If you'd like to be added to our BEPS email list and get relevant updates on the regulation, you can do so by scanning the QR code on the right side of the screen. We'll also drop the link in the chat for that as well. So today's webinar is focused on a specific aspect of BEPS implementation. But if you have any questions regarding the proposed regulation, you may contact the Building Decarbonization team via the email address or phone number at the bottom of your screen. If you give us a call or email us, you'll probably get me on the other end, unfortunately. So you got to bear with me. But so that's how you get in touch with us. Moving further along, just recapping the purpose of this Affordable Housing Working Group. We're going to provide information about affordable housing and Maryland's proposed building energy performance standards. We're going to discuss exemptions for affordable housing providers, establish a space for resource sharing between MDE and providers and also between providers, and request your feedback on relevant compliance processes for affordable housing providers. within Maryland's building energy performance standards. And then if you've done these sessions with us before, allow some time for Q&A. We'll work to address all questions during this session as time allows. If we're unable to answer your questions during the session, we'll work to address them in future informational sessions. So agenda for today, we're going to start with those 2 poll questions I mentioned. We're going to do a quick recap on session 1 to kind of set the stage to review some of the feedback we received on the reduced alternative compliance payment that's available for affordable housing providers and the associated supporting documentation. We're going to get into some additional BEPS exemptions. And then, as I just said, we're going to do some session 1 Q&A catch-up. There were some questions submitted during last session that we weren't able to get to, so we're going to address those today. And then we're going to have an opportunity for Q&A for session 2 questions as time allows at the end of this session. So let's move into these poll questions. So poll question 1, this is following up on our session 1 resources that were discussed by Scott, who's with us again today, and also by Becky Price with the Maryland Energy Administration. But poll question 1, and if you want to participate in the poll, circle, triangle, square, bottom right corner. The poll just got launched. Thanks, Michelle. What resources discussed during session 1 have you looked into since our last session just about a month ago? So there's the Department of Housing and Community Development's MIHA program, or Multifamily Energy Efficiency and Housing Affordability, Decarbonizing Community Buildings Grant Program, MEA's Energy Efficiency Grant Program, the Federal Housing and Urban Development Green and Resilient Retrofit Program for benchmarking assistance, BG&E's Building Tune-Up Program, and other programs. So let's go in and see what kind of results we're getting. So I'm going to leave this open for a second, let everyone who wants to participate submit some feedback in there. Got 7 votes so far. So let's see. If you need to get to the poll, circle, triangle, square, activities button, bottom right-hand corner. Let us know what you're thinking in there. So just 1 more minute on that. All right, so we're going to show everyone the results of this poll. And it looks like a lot of people have looked into the MEA Energy Efficiency Grant Program. And then there's been some good coverage. People have looked into other programs that were discussed during last session. So if you missed last session, the recording is available on the YouTube playlist, so you can go back and listen to Scott and Becky talk about some of these offerings again, or for the first time. So without further ado, I think we'll end that poll, and then we'll move into poll number 2, which follows the same options. So what resources discussed during session 1 are you interested in pursuing in 2025? And same options as the first poll. So let's give that one another minute. And that poll is now active. Circle, triangle, square, activities button. Hit the poll feature. You can submit feedback there on what resources discussed during session 1 are you interested in pursuing in 2025. All right. Well, then we can show people the results of that poll. Resources discussed during session 1 interested in pursuing in 2025. The options have flipped a little bit this time around. folks are looking at decarbonizing community buildings grant program and DHCD MIHA. Those are in the lead for this poll. Yeah, if you require further information on those programs, reach out to MEA, DHCD for the relevant information. We can end that poll for this one and keep moving right along.
And hey, Sam, I'm just going to chime in here really quickly too.
Mm-hmm.
One of the goals of this working group is to learn from each other. So for those of you that said other, I mean, we know there's a whole bunch of programs out there, and we maybe have it listed, but maybe not. And so we'd be curious. We're going to talk about some feedback later, but for the folks that said other, be curious what you're thinking about and what resources you're going to leverage for those properties, because maybe that's something we can share with everybody else in this group in a future session. So glad you all are here today, and we look forward to hearing from you too.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate that clarity. All right. Well, without further ado, keep moving. So, session 1 recap, what happened, what did we talk about? Just a little refresher on what we discussed during our first session back in October. MD provided an overview of BEPS, definitions, and exemptions for affordable housing providers. Scott with DHCD talked about the MIHA program, and Becky Price with the Clean Buildings Hub at MBA talked about the hub itself and its development, and also resources for affordable housing providers. We also released a form to solicit feedback from attendees on the draft application process for reduced alternative compliance payments and available documentation to support these applications. This feedback form will close on Monday, November 25th. So we just ask everyone to get your feedback in. I'm gonna ask Michelle to drop a link in the chat for that form, just in case anyone didn't get it the first time around. Try and get your feedback in by Monday. We would love to hear what you have to say on that. So we also had some time for Q&A. And again, if you missed this first session, check out the BEPS YouTube playlist. So as I mentioned earlier, we released this form to solicit feedback from attendees on the draft reduced alternative compliance payment form and available supporting documentation for those requests. I'm just going to quickly recap the purpose of the form and then get into the feedback we received here. So just as a reminder, an affordable housing provider with plans to improve their building to meet BEPS requirements may apply to reduce their alternative compliance payments to a lower amount or zero. The MDE compliance team will review these applications on a case-by-case basis and determine a reduced payment based on the merits of the application. We ultimately want every building to reduce their emissions and come into compliance. As additional flexibility for affordable housing providers, if you're making a good faith effort, it allows us to reduce your alternative compliance payment so you can invest in your buildings. So with that refresher there on the background, we received the following feedback up on the screen, as you can see here, on this draft application for reduced ACPs, or alternative compliance payments. So attendees had said that there's difficulty in securing funding or sufficient funding for project scopes, and there should be consideration of applications to programs as a good faith effort. And we also received feedback regarding the refinancing cycles that affordable housing providers often face, and we received feedback on the alignment of those refinancing cycles with the alternative compliance timeline within BEPS. And so these are really great points, and we appreciate this feedback. And so I just want to take a quick step back and talk about these points. The Climate Solutions Now Act passed in 2022 with a mandate for all 35,000 square foot buildings, excluding any parking garage area, to reach net zero by 2040. If you're in or gearing up for the refinancing recapitalization cycle, we'd encourage you to plan for your building to meet net zero in that process, rather than meeting the interim standards and being stuck as 2040 approaches given the timelines you all work on. And so just as I'm discussing this, we have a timeline for the proposed BEPS up on the screen, being everyone needs to start benchmarking and reporting their data to the department by June 1st, 2025, so next year. And then 5 years beyond that, the interim standards start to come into effect, being interim standard 1 from 2030 to 2034, interim standard 2 from 2035 to 2039, and then the final standard of net zero direct emissions from a building in 2040 and beyond. So with that timeline in mind, we would just all want you to consider that if you're up for a recapitalization refinancing in 2030 to 2040, we encourage you to plan for compliance with the proposed standards in that cycle. For buildings later on the end of that cycle or beyond 2040, when the regulation refers to applying for any federal or state program, this is a very broad net. This does not necessarily have to happen during your refinancing cycle. We understand that you work on very defined cycles for major renovations, and we just want you to know that we're sincere when we do mean a good faith effort. As we're working through the feedback we've received, we're thinking about applications to programs like DHCD and their MIHA program, or through MEA's programs, as demonstrating a good faith effort. And just want to reiterate that we would love to hear any additional feedback from you all on documentation you could show, or any additional programs that would demonstrate a good faith effort. And so with that, moving on with supporting documentation for these reduced ACP requests and feedback we received since our last session. A reminder that in order to make these requests, affordable housing providers will need to submit documentation to support this building's qualification as affordable housing, a copy of the application to a federal or Maryland administered program that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions, intended scopes of work, and estimated greenhouse gas reductions expected from the intended scope of work to achieve at least the applicable interim or final standard. So we received the following feedback, which you can see up on the screen, that examples of documentation to support this building's qualification as affordable housing could be, a covenant with the agency that regulates the housing, so HUD or DHCD. And we also received feedback on difficulties for naturally occurring affordable housing providers when it comes to their available documentation for these requests. And so we really appreciate this feedback and are taking it into consideration. If you have experience in regards to this, or in applying for programs and being approved as naturally occurring affordable housing, we'd appreciate it if you could submit your feedback in the forms that we're releasing today. And additionally, there was another section in the form on just general feedback, and you can see up on the screen some of the feedback and suggestions we received regarding the definition of financial hardship or financial distress, and the application for these terms and any exemptions related to them. And so, again, thank you for this feedback. With that, I'm going to now review these additional exemptions that are within BEPS and the definition of financial distress. And Zach, I just saw your camera popped on. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one little clarification too for everybody. Sam read through the language and we put it up last time. The whole idea here is, a state program is really any program in the state that's supporting improvements to your buildings. It does not have to be administered by the state, right? It could be other things. There's a wide array of programs to help your building come to reduce their emissions. And so we're just trying to reiterate, this doesn't necessarily have to happen, we're doing a major gut rehab, and that's the only moment. That there are some opportunities off cycle that we're thinking about as we take feedback. How can those be shown as good faith efforts towards meeting these goals? And so, Sam said it, I'm saying it. We just want to kind of make sure that we're making that clear to everybody here, because I know it can maybe get lost in translation a little bit what we're trying to get across. So, but that's one of the reasons we're asking you all to provide examples of programs you're applying for. Like I mentioned before, if those other programs, if you tell us about programs you're aware of, programs you're applying for, things you might use, then we can take that all in as we're looking at this, to help find good pathways for everybody here to be working towards our ultimate goal, which is that net zero emissions in 2040 and beyond. And at the end of the day, that's our target, and that's what these good faith efforts are all about. Are you moving in that right direction towards where we need to end up, and where the law says, all buildings besides some exemptions over 35,000 square feet need to get towards that 2040 net zero. So I just weighing in a little bit more. Sorry to interrupt with you, Sam. But I'll let everyone. I'll let us continue forward. And just a reminder, since I'm already interrupting, if you've got questions, put them in the Q&A. Circle, triangle, square at the bottom right corner of your screen. Feel free to put them in now. We'll get to them at the end, but I know people have them maybe as it comes up as well.
Thanks for that, Zach. That's helpful. And so with that, so we're going to jump into these additional BEPS exemptions that I highlighted earlier on. And some of the regulations exemption language is up on the screen in front of you if you'd like to read that, and I'm going to walk through it with you. So a building owner may apply for an exemption from the requirements of this regulation. Benchmarking, that includes benchmarking and performance standards for 1 calendar year, when the building owner can provide documentation showing that one of the following conditions are met. So one being financial distress, and I've just highlighted that one because we're going to dig into it a little bit further. 2 being the covered building was not occupied for the entirety of the calendar year being reported. Or 3, the covered building was demolished during the calendar year for which benchmarking is required. So those are 3 additional BEPS exemptions, and we're going to there will be forms available to apply for these exemptions upon finalization of the BEPS regulation, and the department will thoroughly evaluate each exemption request. And with that, I'm just going to, as I said, dive a little deeper into financial distress. And again, folks asked about this definition of distress or hardship and its intersection with affordable housing. And you can find the MD BEPS definition of financial distress up on the screen here. Flexibilities for affordable housing providers are handled separately, and the considerations are what we've been discussing in this working group. And these can be found in section C in the proposed regulation, exemptions for affordable housing providers. But I will walk you through these points in any case, or in case any of these definitions apply to buildings in your portfolio. So financial distress means a property that is subject of a tax lien sale or public auction due to property tax arrearages. B, a property that is controlled by a court-appointed receiver. Or C, a property that was acquired by a deed in lieu of foreclosure in the last calendar year. So that's our definition of financial distress. And so we just want to say, thank you again for your feedback on the application for reduced alternative compliance payments and the supporting documentation. Again, that form is still available, and Michelle dropped the link in the chat for that. And the deadline for feedback on that form is November 25th, so this coming Monday. So we would just love it for you all, if you haven't had a chance to look through there yet and submit your thinking, we would love to hear from you. So, but additionally, we're also going to release you another form overload. But Michelle just dropped another one in the chat for you all. We would, based on this feedback we received from the reduced ACP form, we would like to, we're releasing another form today to inquire about additional topics you would like to discuss in future sessions of this working group. So on the screen, you can see here we've made note of the topics of interest from the previous feedback form, being available documentation for naturally occurring affordable housing, refinancing cycles and alignment with BEPS, and programs to assist you mid-refinancing cycle. So we want to know now, are there any additional topics that you would be interested in discussing in 2025? So Michelle just dropped the link for that form in the chat. That form, we would love it if you could get us feedback by December 20th. And so thank you in advance for considering that. And now, as promised, we're going to get into some questions from session 1. And just as Zach just mentioned, if you are you have questions that you'd like for us to address as time allows for this session, circle, triangle, square, bottom right-hand corner, there's a button called Q&A. Submit your questions in there, and we'll work to get to them as time allows. And if not, we'll get to them in future sessions. But with that, again, we have Dr. Zach Brazola, section head of the building decarbonization team here at MDE, and Scott Falvey with DHCD, to assist with questions here for us today. And so with that, I just put up a question from session 1 up on the screen that reads, LIHTC owners are only able to reapply for significant rehabs after 15 years, not annually. How could we demonstrate the good faith effort before year 15? So very relevant to the topics we've been discussing today. And I think, Scott, if you're able to come off mute, come on camera, this is one of the most important questions to consider, and how to align the BEPS cycle and the funding cycle for affordable housing. To get us started with this question, Scott, could you please provide some context on how the MIHA funds interact with the major construction and rehab financing available from DHCD?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Sam. And I think I'll probably reiterate, first of all, something that you had said earlier, and that would be to really starting now for properties that are going through recapitalization, they should be planning to achieve these standards as part of the design, now, rather than waiting 2, 3, 5 years. These properties that you're coming into the DHCD for refinancing now will have, a 15-year span where you're trying to achieve compliance, and it may be more difficult or more expensive than if you are planning for that and designing that now. So that being said, I know a lot of you have gone through our MIHA programs, and again, we have the MIHA Empower program, and we have the MIHA GHGRP for decarbonization. And the way that we try to, so we actually have 2 ways of getting into the program. You can come into the program, or I should say, you can get funding through the program, either through a direct application to the program, or if you're coming into DHCD for refinancing. And either way, we're looking at your project, and if you're coming in through rental lending, through the rental guide and seeking other financing, that there's energy efficiency requirements that are there. If it's new construction, you're required to come in with all electric building anyway. But the purpose of the programs is to help you actually achieve, these standards, where the program is here to help give you funds to increase the efficiency of your equipment so that, you have a better chance of achieving these funds, and it doesn't cost you as much to do that. So, from a high level, it's pretty easy to get applications in. No matter how you come into DHCD for financing, our energy programs are still looking at your applications and trying to give you funds to make this more affordable. Regarding timing for kind of midterm, it's still kind of a difficult conversation. We understand that there's challenges with doing work in the interim, and unfortunately, I'm not the professional in that area, but it definitely is a conversation that we need to continue having.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott. Appreciate that answer.
You're welcome.
I think with that, maybe I'll pitch it over to Dr. Decarb, Zach Brazola, see if you have any additional reactions or anything you wanted to add in for this question 1.
I think I'll just kind of echo Scott and say, this is going to be a continued point of discussion. We're going to work together for a future session to get the person Scott's mentioning that's really familiar with this, and we can discuss a little bit deeper down this question. But we wanted to put it up here because we've heard you, we've been hearing this, we've been thinking about it, and trying to find opportunities for that mid-cycle work as well, to be demonstration of good faith effort down that path. But again, for a lot of buildings, we still a good number of years out from even the interim standards. So start thinking, just to what Scott said, if you're doing work now, think about it, right? And Sam said this too. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but if you're recapitalizing today, we've had these, and been talking about them for 2 years. So this is coming. And please keep this in mind as you're doing your work going forward, to not make it even harder for you down the road. So just to reiterate that. But with that, I think that's all I have to say on this.
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you both. All right, moving right along. Session 1, question 2. So, will MDE consult with DHCD when reviewing the compliance fee, exemption fee requests, especially if the project is in DHCD's loan portfolio? And maybe I'll pitch this one to you, Zach, to kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the answer here is yes, a resounding yes. We work very closely with Scott and the rest of the team at DHCD. So one of the key pieces here is close coordination. We require documentation so that we have it all documented, no matter which way you're coming through. But documentation of that you're working with DHCD then helps us make sure that we're all pushing in the same direction. So the answer is yes, in short.
Thank you for that. And I think maybe I'll pitch it over to Scott. Scott, did you have anything to add on what Zach just said?
No, I would agree. We've had conversations, up to this point about this, about these instances, and we will going forward too. Even the good faith effort, that's part of this conversation. And I think what Zach said is, exactly right. So definitely in agreement with that.
Great. Thanks so much. All right, moving right along. So session 1, question 3. If the projects take years to complete, can the waiver be for 3 to 5 years? I think this one seems like a Dr. Decarb question. What do you think?
Yeah,
absolutely. This one?
Happy to talk about this one. So procedurally, you're going to have to reapply each year, but we actually have, and we put it up before, and it's in the feedback form, a space for the year you're starting and the year you have anticipated completion, because we know some of these projects might take 2-3 years. If you're in the middle of making these renovations to meet this, and you're going to be reaching that net zero or an interim target because of that project, I'm not the compliance folks, but that very much is exactly the kind of thing we are thinking about when we talk about a good faith effort. If your building is in the middle of construction or renovation, to do it. So you will technically have to apply each year, but it's just going to be the same kind of information you've submitted, and us doing the review. So again, short answer is yes.
Great. Thank you for that. All right, onward. This is our last session 1 question. I think this one might be for Zach again, but regarding the alternative compliance fee, what is the current fee estimated to be? A lot of rhyming in today's session. That's always good. What is the proposed alternative fee amount? Is it set or case by case? This is an exemption for referring to the reduced alternative compliance payment. This is an exemption for the fee, but not exemption to meet the requirement to electrify buildings. Zach, do you think you can take that one for us?
Totally. And I'll start actually from the bottom a little bit. This is an exemption from paying the alternative compliance, from making an alternative compliance payment, which and we did this in the last session, right? The performance standard in BEPS is to meet ultimately a net zero by 2040, net zero direct greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. If you don't meet that, you can also choose to meet that by making an alternative compliance payment, and also finding somewhere a balance in between those two of getting most of the way, but making alternative compliance payments to kind of meld the two. And that's also the idea. If you're going to do some work in 2 or 3 years, maybe you would make that alternative compliance payment now in anticipation of that work. So that's broadly in the BEPS program what it is. So it is, and what this is not an exemption to meet that net direct greenhouse gas emissions of 0. But for affordable housing providers, the whole reason we're here is that we've said there is this flexibility in what that alternative compliance payment is. And that exemption is, you're still required to benchmark your buildings and ultimately, either fully meet that performance standard or opt to meet it and make that payment. But how much that payment is, you can apply through this process to reduce that potentially all the way down to 0. And that's just going to be determined on a case-by-case basis by the MDE compliance staff. So I don't have an answer for you for what it will be, but it could be as low as 0, and that's determined case by case. In terms of what the current fee is, it is set in the regulation. You can see in the proposed regulation, which is you can get to through our website, but it's in there listed out. The alternative compliance payment increases $4 a year, but it starts initially in 2030 at $230 per metric ton of CO2 equivalent. So basically, it starts at $230 per ton of CO2 equivalent. It goes up $4 a year, and that makes that's where it is for kind of all buildings. But again, the whole point here, and one of the reasons that we don't necessarily have the same why this is a specific place is around specific flexibilities for affordable housing providers to bring that down and adjust that if you're planning and working towards meeting these goals. That was a long-winded answer, but hopefully it answered your question. If not, feel free to drop it in the Q&A, and we'll try to take another go at it.
All right, thanks for that, Zach. All right, well, that closes out the session 1, the leftover questions from session 1. So thank you all for submitting those. And so with that, we want to talk next session, Affordable Housing Working Group session 3. So we distributed that feedback form today on additional discussion topics for the next session of this group. We'd love it if you could complete that form, and we will get back to you all on timing for the 3rd session and a description of the content, but it will be in early 2025. As I'm sure a lot of you know, if you'd like to sign up for this next session or any other informational sessions, please sign up using the form that I think Michelle might drop in the chat for it. She's great. Perfect timing. So that's our informational session form. Go there to stay apprised of what we're rolling out. But you can also access that sign-up form by going to the BEPS website. And yeah, go ahead, Zach.
Oh, hey, Sam. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to, because we had a slight typo when we first put it in, and I know we drop a ton of links every time. Again, we always put this in the YouTube description when we post it, if you're ever trying to find it, and we usually send it out as well with after the working group session. But we kind of have a couple of to-dos out of today, right? Before that next meeting, there's the feedback form for the application for alternative compliance payments and supporting documentation. That's what we released last time. We initially had the due date a little while ago. We extended it to this coming Monday. So you have a couple more days if you want, if the session brought up some more things you want to think about. And then we also have, it got pasted twice just with the wrong name once, but we have this feedback on MDEs, on the BEPS Affordable Housing Provider Working Group discussion topic. So this is going to be the discussion topics that we get to in the next session. So we talked about one already today around, but if you have some additional topics for that next session, we really ask you to put that in there. You have kind of through most of December to do that. But we're just trying to cater this working group to the topics you all want to discuss and make sure that we are covering what you're interested in and what helps you move forward.
Thank you, Zach. So with that, we're gonna thank you all for attending again and being a part of our working groups. Contact information for us is up on the screen. MDEs, Building Decarbonization Team, left-hand side. You got Scott's information on the right-hand side. I think now we can work to address some Q&A for this session. So I'm going to go into the Q&A feature, see what's rolling out for us. So just bear with me 1 second while I pull these up. We're pretty light today, not too many questions. I guess we're just supplying some great information. I think that's the conclusion we have to make here. But again, if you have some questions that are lingering, submit them in the feedback form, or if you want us to address them today, Q&A feature, bottom right-hand corner, activities button, circle, triangle, square. Submit your questions there. But yeah, like I said, pretty light right now, so we might even get to end early, give you some of your day back. But all right, I think this one might be for Zach. Let me see. All right, Dr. Decarb, I got one ready for you. So we have properties where tenants pay a portion or all of their utilities. What if a tenant is not willing to provide us with their data? Great question. Think you could take that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't unique to affordable housing providers. Tenants are required in the regulation to supply that data. So let me actually take a step back, actually. Under BEPS, if you've been coming to our sessions, this is all old hat, but if folks are new here, again, we encourage you to go to the website to learn more. But if you are in most of you are going to be in a large building, even with your tenants paying for their own electricity or other utilities. You're going to work with your utility providers to get that data. And if there's 5 or more different tenants in a building, then you can actually just submit that request directly to the utility, and they're going to aggregate it. There is no tenant authorization required. So that's actually a super streamlined process. We're going to have a little bit more information on like how to get started with that by the different utilities up on the website when we finalize. But that's going to be the kind of information that we're aiming to put out there. If there's 4 or fewer tenants, then you have to get authorization from the tenants. You can do that in a lease. So we're encouraging everyone to update their leases if you've got that scenario to reflect this. But you can, in that case, you can ask for, you can get their authorization, and then the utility will again provide it to you aggregated. If all of that fails, tenants are required to supply data within 30 days upon request if building owner is unable to acquire it by other sources. So, like the whole thing here is if building owners or tenants are still required to do this under the regulation, and we'll have a way to document non-compliance with that as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Dr. Decarb. All right, continuing along here, see what else we got. ready to discuss today. Back to the Q&A. Oh, now they're starting to roll in. There we go. Okay, cool. So, Zach, I've got another question. This one's actually regarding tenants again. So, pretty apt to what you're just talking about. Some of our properties have tenants paying all of their utilities. I'm hoping to get an understanding if the requirements of the legislation pertain to only the common elements of the building that we have control over, or if the legislation will be in full effect for the full square footage of the building. Think you could talk about that real quick?
Yeah, great question. It is for the entire building. So, if you have to report the energy used for the full building. If you want to go into our benchmarking guide, which the draft is on the website, actually it's mostly listed in the TM right now, but we're going to edit it as we talked about in a working group earlier this week. But there's a few minor exemptions, things like, if you've got a cell tower on your roof, an aeration fountain for a holding pool. I mean, there's a couple of really random things that aren't really related. Short list from the EPA there, but otherwise you have to include the energy use for the whole building, minus things used by the parking garage, EV charging. So yes, it doesn't matter how the utilities are set up, who's paying what, you have to get it for the whole building, and that's why we have this requirement around data aggregation with 5 or more tenants, and the authorization for 4 or fewer.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, another one for you. Regarding reduced alternative compliance payments, what will the deadline for submitting these applications be for reduced alternative compliance payments?
Yes. So this is actually, I believe it was in the draft form. If not, it's definitely in the regulation and the accompanying manual. The deadline will be, the reporting deadline of June 1st, starting in 2031. And that's something I think we said before, but I just want to reiterate, folks. The thing we're talking about here is flexibilities in the alternative compliance payment, which don't take effect until calendar year 2030 data, which gets reported by June 1st of 2031. And so that's when we're talking about the kind of deadline and all of this coming up is not for a few years. So we've got a couple of years of chatting with us and learning from you all to keep talking and making some improvements to ensure that this is a super smooth process for everybody involved. So that's kind of the answer there.
Great, thank you, Zach. Okay, well, I think we'll stay on that theme of the alternative compliance payments. So we got a question here. Another one for you, Zach. You're just you're getting them all. We're doing other energy efficiency measures at our project or at our building. If we can show improvement to emissions but do not electrify, we would be subject to the alternative compliance payment, and can we apply for exemption?
Yeah, this is a good one, and the answer here really is the state legislature in the Climate Solutions Now Act said all buildings have to meet net zero by 2040 or pay that alternative compliance payment. And so that is ultimately what we're working towards is net zero emissions, and it doesn't necessarily have to be electrification. There are other pathways to get there. Specifically, we have some future work we're doing around a couple of different things specified in the legislation around different. It's really about net direct emissions. So there's some pathways that might change in the future around the things like carbon capture we got asked about. And so that's something that's coming down the pike in essence, but definitely reducing those net direct emissions to zero is still the goal, however you get there. And so the ACP reduction can help kind of in the interim, but if you're not getting there at all, that really is where you're making that choice that it's cheaper to make an ACP than do the actual projects themselves. And that is the whole point of the ACP and the regulation, and why the legislature required it, is it puts a cost cap on compliance. So if you decide that it really is more cost effective to just keep making the ACP, you can do that. That is in full compliance with regulation, or again, get really efficient, and then you're only emitting a very small amount. We talk a lot too about, if you've got like a small thing that's still producing emissions, it might be cheaper to keep paying for that little bit than to deal with that last little bit. Totally fine. That's what it's all about. This is intended to, you're making good faith efforts towards it. Now, you can absolutely you can apply for these, and the compliance team will evaluate it if you think you're still making a good faith effort down that path. But this is kind of the structure we're working within.
Great, thank you, Zach. All right, diving back into the Q&A. Bear with me while I pull it up here again for you. Circle, triangle, square. That's where you need to go to submit a question, or if you have other thoughts, feedback forms, we'd love to hear what you have to say. Okay. So, does the data request process cover gas use as well? BG&E, Baltimore Gas and Electric, is moving their portal to the same one used by other Exelon utilities. Delmarva, for instance, will not provide gas use info, only electricity. You have any light you can shed on that, Zach?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I need to go back and double check, but I mean, in general, yes, this covers electric and gas, and that's what's written in the regulation. It is that, this covers electric and gas companies, and so it is meant to be both. If they're an integrated utility in general, well, honestly, that part depends a little bit on the utility, how it's set up, whether you're submitting to both, for both, or one to the electric side, one to the gas side. Every utility is a little bit different, so I can't say definitively on that one. But yes, there is a lot of streamlining happening among the Exelon utilities as well. But if you've got only an electric utility, they're going to just provide that.
Great, thank you. And I think another question just came in as more of a comment, just confirming Baltimore Gas and Electric provides electric and gas consumption. So thank you all for also submitting that confirmation.
Yeah, and I guess just to add some more clarity, yes, they provide both. And we haven't gotten to the finalization of that platform, what they're going to look like, and I just can't say right now whether it's going to be one request for both gas and electric together, or if you have to request gas and electric separate. Those details are to come, just because within the utilities themselves, the gas side and the electric side are sometimes a little bit separate. So keep your eyes peeled. That will be part of the rollout of the regulation, is how that, how you request it for the different utilities and the different fuels.
All right, thank you. Okay. Time check, 5 minutes left. So let's dive back into Q&A here. Bear with me while I bring them up. So here's a question for you, Zach. Can you share more about other ways to meet net zero without electrifying? If not here, in a future session.
Yeah, I mean, I encourage you to come to our benchmarking and reporting working group, where we talk about the mechanics of filling this out, and then what that means. In general, what we're looking for is net direct emissions from that building. And so you have this option of getting to, by 2040, zero net direct emissions or paying that alternative compliance fee. So that is one option for not getting to net zero without, for getting to net zero without electrification is, well, you don't quite get there, but you make an alternative compliance payment. So that is always an option. And then for kind of other pieces there, we encourage you to come to the future benchmarking and reporting working groups. And we're probably going to run even yet another working group diving even deeper down onto some of these topics in the future. So appreciate you coming today, and we'll have more of that in the future.
All right, that's great. Well, I think that just about wraps it up here for questions today. Had a lot of questions come in. So thank you all. And if you have any additional questions outside of the working groups, contact information for us still up on the screen. Reach out to us with any questions that come up for you. But just again, got a couple minutes left. Please submit your feedback in those forms. We are, for the reduced ACP form, November 25th is the deadline, and then the discussion topics form, December 20th. So we'd love to hear from you. We'll get back to you in the new year with the next session for this working group. So with that, I think we can close it out, and thank you all for attending. Hope you have some nice holidays, and we'll see you in 2025. Thanks, everybody.